Here we're going to look at some of the most unique and fascinating historic military units, from units composed solely of lovers to units composed of giants. Among the many elite military units in ancient history, few were as unique or as storied as the Sacred Band of Thebes. Formed in the 4th century BC, this formidable force stood apart not just for its battlefield prowess, but for its very foundation. The unit was composed entirely of 150 pairs of male lovers, totaling 300 men. The men were hand-picked and their selection was based on merit as opposed to social class. Each pair consisted of an older and younger man. The Thebans believed that soldiers bound by deep emotional ties would fight more fiercely and bravely, unwilling to show cowardice in front of their beloved or abandon them in combat. It was a radical idea for the time, yet one that proved devastatingly effective. The Sacred Band was established during a period when Thebes sought to assert its dominance over other Greek city-states, particularly Sparta, whose hoplite warriors were the gold standard of military excellence. Under the leadership of commanders like Gorgidas and later Pelopidas, the Sacred Band quickly gained a reputation for discipline, courage, and near-mythic unity. Their defining moment came at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC. In a stunning reversal of expectations, Theban-led forces led by the brilliant tactician Epaminondas defeated a much larger Spartan army, shattering Sparta's aura of invincibility. The Sacred Band played a central role in this victory, anchoring the Theban left flank and cutting down the elite Spartan hoplites, including members of Sparta's royal guard. Sparta would never recover from losing so many of its citizens in this battle, and it forever reduced Sparta to a secondary power. The battle not only altered the balance of power in Greece, but it also proved the effectiveness of the Sacred Band's unconventional makeup. For decades afterwards, the unit remained at the heart of the Theban military power. But their end came in 338 BC at the Battle of Chaeronea, where the rising power of Macedon under Philip II and his son Alexander the Great crushed the combined forces of Thebes and Athens. The Sacred Band fought to the last man, refusing to retreat or surrender. When Philip saw their bodies strewn across the battlefield, he is said to have wept, recognizing the valor and loyalty that had defined them. Among the most extraordinary military units in world history were the Dahomey Amazons, an all-female fighting force that served the kingdom of Dahomey, in present-day Benin, from the 17th to the 19th century. Known for their fierce discipline, unmatched courage, and unshakable loyalty to their king, they are one of the few documented all-women armies in recorded history. To European observers of the time, they seemed almost mythical. Warrior women who defied every expectation of gender and combat. They were called Amazons by Europeans, but they referred to themselves as Minnow, meaning our mothers. The origins of the unit are debated. Some trace them to elephant huntresses who gradually took on military roles, while others believe they were originally palace guards. The rise of an all-female military regiment in Dahomey was largely a response to the heavy losses suffered by the male population during the kingdom's frequent and escalating conflicts with neighbouring West African states. By the early 18th century, under King Gezo, the group was formalized into a standing army. King Gezo expanded their ranks and elevated their status, seeing in them a loyal and effective counterbalance to the male-dominated military factions. What made the Dahomey Amazons unique wasn't just their gender, but their intensity. From a young age, recruits were trained in hand-to-hand combat, marksmanship, endurance, and tactical strategy. They took oaths of celibacy, renounced family life, and lived in the royal compound. Their loyalty was to the king alone. On the battlefield, they fought with machetes, muskets, and later European rifles. One of their most notable military engagements came during the Franco-Dahomean Wars in the late 19th century. Despite being outgunned and outnumbered by the French colonial forces, the Dahomey Amazons fought with relentless bravery. Following a series of hard-fought battles, the French ultimately emerged victorious in the Second Franco-Dahomean War, bringing an end to the independent kingdom of Dahomey. Despite their defeat, the fierce resistance of the Dahomey Amazons left a lasting impression on the French troops, especially members of the French Foreign Legion, who later recounted their engagements with admiration, describing the women warriors as displaying astonishing bravery and fearlessness on the battlefield. Though the Dahomey kingdom was ultimately absorbed into French West Africa, the legacy of its warrior women endures. The last known survivor of the Dahomey Amazon is believed to have been a woman named Nawi, in 1978, a Beninese historian interviewed her in the village of Kinta, where she recounted fighting against French forces during the 1892 campaign. Nawe passed away in November 1979, reportedly at well over 100 years old. Few military forces in history have been as influential or as unique as the Janissaries of the Ottoman Empire. Established in the late 14th century by Sultan Murad I, the Janissaries began as an elite corps of infantry who would go on to become one of the most formidable and loyal military units in the world for nearly 5 centuries. What made the Janissaries truly distinct was their origin. They were not recruited from among Ottoman citizens, but rather through a system known as devshirme, a levy on Christian boys from the empire's Balkan territories. These young boys were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and rigorously trained in military discipline, loyalty, and state service. Cut off from their former lives, they are molded into soldiers with unwavering allegiance to the Sultan himself. The social standing of devshirme recruits improved significantly once they entered the system, as it offered greater access to government positions and financial stability. In fact, in poorer regions, it wasn't uncommon for parents to bribe officials to select their sons, viewing the devshirme as a rare opportunity for upward mobility and a better future. This of course does not dilute the fact that many were forcibly taken and they were slaves. Over time, the Janissaries became not just a military force, but a powerful institution within the empire. Unlike other military units of the era, the Janissaries were professional soldiers. They received regular salaries, wore standardized uniforms, and lived under a strict code of conduct. They were forbidden from marrying until the age of 40 or engage in trade during the service. Rules meant to maintain their focus and loyalty, though these restrictions were later relaxed. Their reputation for discipline and cohesion made them a core part of Ottoman military might. The Janissaries played a crucial role in many of the empire's most significant battles. They were at the forefront of the conquest of Constantinople in 1453, breaching the city's formidable walls and ending the Byzantine Empire. They were also instrumental in major campaigns across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, and numerous confrontations with the Habsburgs and the Safavids. As the Janissaries grew increasingly conscious of their power and status, their ambitions expanded beyond the battlefield. By the early 1600s, they had become a dominant force within the Ottoman state, wielding enough influence to shape political decisions and challenge the authority of the Sultan himself. No longer just elite soldiers, the Janissaries evolved into kingmakers, capable of staging revolts, blocking reforms, and even orchestrating palace coups to install rulers more favorable to their interests. Over time, regulations that once ensured their discipline were relaxed. They were allowed to marry, acquire property, and engage in commerce, transforming them from a professional military corps into a powerful social and economic class. Their growing entanglement in politics and business not only diluted their military effectiveness, but also made them a major obstacle to modernization efforts within the empire. By the early 19th century, Sultan Mahmud II saw them as a threat to his authority and the future of the empire. In 1826, he attempted to disband them, but the majority of the 135,000 Janissaries rose in open revolt against the Sultan. When the uprising was swiftly and forcibly crushed, the consequences were severe. Thousands were executed, exiled, or imprisoned. This became known as the Auspicious Incident. With the Janissary Corps officially disbanded, Mahmud II moved quickly to replace him with a modern Western-style army, marking a decisive break from centuries of tradition and opening a new chapter in Ottoman military reform. If you're interested in delving deeper into any of the units discussed in this video, I have links to fascinating books in the description. One of the most peculiar military units in European history was the Potsdam Giants, an elite Prussian infantry regiment composed almost entirely of exceptionally tall soldiers. Created in the late 17th century and reaching its peak under King Frederick William I of Prussia, this regiment wasn't formed for military necessity, but rather for the monarch's personal obsession. Frederick William I, often called the Soldier King, was fanatical about discipline, order, and military grandeur. He viewed tall soldiers not only as a symbol of power, but also a sort of living artwork. In 1713, he officially established the Potsdam Giants as part of his royal guard. To qualify, a soldier generally had to be over 6 feet 2 inches tall, an exceptional height for the time. The taller the recruit, the the more delighted the king was. Some of his most prized members stood over 7 feet tall. To staff the regiment, the king went to extraordinary lengths. Tall men were recruited from across Europe. Some were offered as lavish payments, others were gifted the king by foreign rulers as diplomatic gestures. In more desperate cases, Persian agents were rumoured to have kidnapped tall individuals or coerced families into surrendering their tall sons. Within Prussia, height became a kind of currency, and even the offspring of tall couples were registered in the hopes of raising future soldiers. Despite the regiment's military training and appearance, the Potsdam Giants rarely saw combat. Their primary role was ceremonial, parading before the king or standing guard at the royal palace. Frederick William would reportedly spend hours watching them drill, and he was known to paint their portraits or dream up elaborate uniforms to show off their imposing size. The height was more about spectacle than strategy. When the king died in 1740, the Potsdam Giant Regiment had grown to around 3,200 men. However, his son and successor, Frederick the Great, saw little value in maintaining such an expensive and impractical unit. Unlike his father, he viewed the regiment as more of a costly novelty than a serious military asset. As a result, the regiment was mostly disbanded, with many of his soldiers reassigned to other parts of the Prussian army. What remained was reduced to a smaller unit, a battalion, known as the Guard Grenadier No. 6. This battalion did see action fighting in major battles during the War of Austrian Succession in 1745. The end came after Prussia's defeat by Napoleon in 1806. The battalion surrendered, after which it was officially disbanded and absorbed in the 1st Guard Regiment on foot, marking the final chapter of the once famous Potsdam Giants. Among the most fearsome and elite warriors of the Aztec Empire were the Eagle and Jaguar warriors, 2 prestigious military orders that combined brutal skill with deep spiritual and symbolic significance. These were not common soldiers. They were seasoned fighters who had distinguished themselves on the battlefield and risen through the ranks based on merit. From a young age, aspiring warriors trained at specialized schools, where they were rigorously educated in warfare, discipline, and religious doctrine and the responsibilities of military service. Success on the battlefield was one of the few ways an individual could rise in Aztec society, making the warrior path both a practical and spiritual pursuit. To attain the rank of Jaguar or Eagle warrior, a soldier was required to capture at least 4 enemies in combat. This feat was considered a far greater honor than killing, as live captives were offered in ritual sacrifice to appease the gods. Killing an enemy outright was often viewed as clumsy or undisciplined. Capturing one alive demonstrated superior skill, bravery, and self-control. The Eagle warriors were linked to the sun and the sky. They wore helmets shaped like eagle heads and dressed in vivid feathers, symbolizing divine power, strength, and courage. They were believed to be the early embodiment of Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god, destined to accompany the sun in its daily journey across the heavens. In contrast, Jaguar warriors were associated with the night, the earth, and the god Tezcatlipoca. They donned actual jaguar pelts and feline-shaped helmets, embodying stealth, strategy, and ferocity, qualities reflective of their divine patron. Fully initiated Eagle and Jaguar warriors served as full-time soldiers and guardians of the state. Beyond leading troops into battle, they protected merchants, maintained law and order, and even acted as internal police force. Their status brought noble privileges: the right to own land, wear luxurious clothing, dine at the royal palace, and participate in political and ceremonial life. In warfare, these warriors wielded traditional weapons like the Makwawitl, a wooden sword embedded with razor-sharp obsidian blades, and carried ornate chamali shields. Spanish conquistadors, including Bernal Diaz del Castillo, wrote of the Eagle and Jaguar warriors with awe and fear, noting their fierce combat skills, striking appearance, and unwavering discipline. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Odd Historian. If you'd like to support the channel, please like and subscribe, and check out my Patreon for exclusive content. See you next time.